If we were reading these stories from Genesis and Luke for the first time, we would be on the edge of our seats. Come to think of it, that's exactly the way that we should read Bible passages, whether we've read them one time or 100 times. The stories of God's people are incredibly dramatic. They're almost nail-biting. It's helpful to know what happens before these passages as well as what happens after them. In the story of Jacob, we have already followed part of this truly a spectacle. Jacob bought his brother Esau's birthright or inheritance for a bowl of stew, and then impersonated Esau to get the blessing of the firstborn. When this was revealed, Esau raged against Jacob and threatened to kill him. And this wasn't just a turn of phrase. He was going to kill him. Jacob left Isaac and Rebekah's house and journeyed to Uncle Laban's land. Laban was his mother's brother. Laban was also just as calculating and conniving as Jacob. Jacob falls for his first cousin, Rachel, and asks to take her as his wife. Now, just because Jacob was his nephew didn't mean that Laban was going to agree to this easily. He saw some dollar signs or shekel signs in his mind. He demanded Jacob work for 7 years for him before he would give his daughter to him. And since Jacob hadn't gotten any of his inheritance because his dad was still alive, he didn't have any money to pay the bride price. And so he worked for 7 years. Rachel was actually Laban's second daughter. His older daughter was Leah. In a poor telling of this story, people have said that Leah was ugly and Rachel was beautiful, but the Bible doesn't say that at all. Leah is described in the Hebrew as having tender eyes, and Rachel as being shapely. The women were attractive in different ways. On the wedding night, Laban brought Leah, not Rachel, to Jacob's bed, and they consummated their union. But Jacob didn't seem to notice till the next day, which I never got how that could happen. But at some point, I think we have to say that some of the things that happened to Jacob were karma. Laban then told Jacob he could have Rachel as well if he worked another 7 years. Jacob agreed, and at the end of the week, both women were his wives. We must understand that marriage in these ancient days did not involve ceremony or sharing vows of any kind. There was no chuppah to stand under. There is no breaking of the glasses to seal the covenant. Marriage was a business contract. Literally, getting a wife with a bride price. Jacob paid 7 years each for his brides. And as I said, within a week, Jacob had both of his wives. Jacob then and Laban spent the next 14 years cheating each other, which is a great story in itself that I'll tell someday. But when Jacob left with his wives and concubines who were added to his bed, and 11 sons, 6 of which had been born to Leah, but only 1 to Rachel, Jacob was now a very rich man because he had accumulated great herds of sheep and goats, so he headed home to Daddy. But lingering in the background was that threat by his brother, Esau, who vowed to kill him. Jacob found out that Esau was heading his way with about 400 warriors, and he was terrified. And that's where our story picked up today. Jacob decided to overwhelm Esau with kindness and with gifts of generosity, thinking that if he forked over enough stuff, Esau wouldn't kill him. Jacob had encountered God on this journey of 20 years, but he was still manipulating. So he sent cattle and donkeys and sheep and goats and camels, and probably most disgusting to us, people, slaves, to his brother. And we wonder, at the end of the telling of the story today, would this reunion end up in joy or tragedy? That's the cliffhanger that we will explore on January the 1st. The second dramatic story this morning is about Zechariah and Elizabeth. And this is another story of miraculous birth, of God's interceding in human life to bring about the divine will. Zechariah and Elizabeth were, like Sarah and Abraham, well advanced in age, and they hadn't had any children yet. Elizabeth was related to Mary. 2 weeks ago, we learned how Mary found out that she was pregnant. The son of Zechariah and Elizabeth would be announced this time to the father, to Zechariah. Now, Zechariah was a priest in the temple, very well respected, righteous man. And one day, an angel appeared to him, and he was terrified. But the angel said, "Don't be afraid." Yes, because angels seem to say that a lot. Then the angel explained to Zechariah that he and Elizabeth would have a son, and the son, like all firstborn male children, would be dedicated to God's service. The angel told him to name the child John, which was very unusual, because most Jews named their children after someone in the family or someone they want to have their characteristics when the child grows up. John would not only become an ascetic, but he would proclaim the coming of Jesus' ministry. Now, Zechariah, not surprising to us, doubted what the angel told him, and that really annoyed the angel. And so the angel struck him mute until the child would be born. This was a problem for Zechariah because being a priest, you did a lot of public speaking, and you needed your voice. When Elizabeth was 6 months pregnant, an angel appeared to Mary and said, "Do not be afraid." You see a pattern here going? All right. And she also told her that she would have a son. These miraculous pregnancies were a sign that with God things were possible. Things that we think are impossible, God can make happen. When John, who would be referred to as the Baptist, was born, Zechariah was again able to speak. And when he did so, he spoke as a prophet, not a priest. Zechariah's joy was overwhelming, but it wasn't just because he and Elizabeth had this beautiful child now to love. The people asked, what then will become of this child? It was obvious that the hand of God was upon this child. The child John was a joy because he would be a prophet of the Most High. He would go before the Lord and prepare his way. John would give the people knowledge of salvation by forgiveness of their sins, and he would baptize them for the remission of their sins. The joy was that God remembered the covenant all these hundreds and thousands of years later. He remembered the covenant with Abraham and Sarah, with Isaac and Rebekah, and even with Jacob and Rachel. John would grow up and he would be strong in spirit, and he would announce that the day of the Lord had come. This is the joy that we celebrate today. God did not and does not forget the great promise of the covenant. God promised Messiah. God promised Emmanuel. God is with us.